Ever since elementary school, I, who went by the name of Dexter, struggled with academics. Once I became a high school student, I wanted to graduate as quickly as possible. Deciding not to pursue university was an early decision. I couldn't find any sense in studying at school, except for crafting, art, physical education, and, well, lunch. Enduring things I didn't want to do was a pure pain. Instead, I wanted to start working early to get skill set needed. My name, Dexter, was given to me by my father, a carpenter. Apparently, he believed that if one has skills, would never starve. I heard this from my mother. I never asked my father about the origin of my name. He passed away from cancer when I was in the 2nd grade of elementary school. However, it feels apt to say that the name reflects the person. From a young age, I was good with my hands. I found it incredibly fun to change the shape of things in my hands at will. My mother would say, seeing the chairs, bookshelves, and small containers I brought home from the craft lessons in high school.
Like father, like son.
I don't know what she intended by that, but for me, it was the highest compliment. After all, it made me realize that I am the child of my father, who was the coolest to me. Upon graduating from high school, I got a job in a local factory that produces various machine parts, assembles large devices, and small equipment. The workforce, including part-time staff, was around 20 people. My seniors at work ranged from 20 to 50 years old, the oldest of whom was Mr. Brown, a seasoned veteran in this line for 35 years. He had the title of factory manager, but he always said, "Such a stuffy title doesn't suit me," and had everyone call him by a nickname derived from his last name. He was the archetype of a craftsman and spoke in rough language. I was taken aback by Mr. Brown's rough language when I first joined. However, Mr. Brown was an attractive person with a gap between his appearance and the actual person he was. He was as big as a bear, as his name suggests, but his work was quick and much more meticulous than anyone else's. Moreover, he was always smiling, so everyone loved him. Everyone, including Mr. Brown, was kind to me, who was just a high school student a few months ago. Except for Director Smith, the General Affairs Department. Despite having been at the factory for just about a year, he was the head of department, I heard, because our president had gone out of his way to recruit him. The reason being, Director Smith was a classmate of our CEO from high school and a former banker. Apparently, our CEO, who had long thought that the company needed a financial makeover, approached him for advice and he joined the company. He was just lucky to be picked up by our CEO when he dropped out of the bank's race for promotion. There were rumors to that effect in the company, but I didn't know what was true. The trouble was, the CEO had been hospitalized with a bad back about a month before I joined the company. By the time I joined, Director Smith was effectively at the top of the company.
I have been entrusted with full authority by the CEO.
Director Smith used to say this all the time. From Director Smith, I was marked early on after joining the company. I don't know what the direct cause was. My manners towards my seniors were not in place. My work was slow. My handling of products was rough. No matter how careful I was in my actions, Mr. Smith's nagging at me didn't change. One day, I was called into the office by Director Smith. There was an error in the document I submitted. Was it because it was a mistake that could have been caught with a little caution? Director Smith verbally attacked me more persistently than ever before. The people in the office who were there looked at me with pitying eyes but said nothing. Perhaps they didn't want Director Smith's mood to worsen and affect them. It was longer than usual. I thought to myself,
We can't take an employee like you, who has contributed extremely little to the company. On our next staff trip, we can't leave the company completely unattended. So this works out. I need you to stay behind and keep an eye on things. I let the CEO know that you're the one who said you can't go on the trip. Got it.
Director Smith rattled off all at once. It was a long-standing tradition at our company to go on a hot spring trip for relaxation on the last weekend of the fiscal month. Of course, all expenses were covered by the company. Although it was just an overnight trip, I heard that we'd be staying at a renowned luxury inn in town with a grand banquet in the evening. As the trip approached, the staff's morale was high. Listening to the stories of previous trips from those around me, my own anticipation grew. It was my first staff trip, and I had never stayed at a luxury inn before, so I was all the more excited. The fact that I am the only one left behind made me frustrating and infuriating. Mixed feelings well up. But I can't go against my boss's orders. I concluded that I have no choice but to do as Director Smith says. It was early next morning before work started. Mr. Brown, who had just returned from the office, was approaching me with wide strides. He was usually mild-mannered, but I could tell he was angry even from a distance.
"What's going on?"
Mr. Brown abruptly asked me. I didn't understand what Mr. Brown meant. Seeing my confused look, Mr. Brown, still looking angry, asked me again.
"What's this I hear about you staying behind during the staff trip?"
He must have heard about it when he went to the office. I was uncertain whether I should explain the situation to Mr. Brown. Then Mr. Brown unloaded on me.
"I've always thought his attitude towards you was too harsh. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind."
I couldn't believe mild-mannered Mr. Brown would refer to Director Smith like that. I felt a surge of happiness knowing that Mr. Brown was going to bat for me.
"Just wait. I'll sort this out."
With that, Mr. Brown turned his back on me. "Mr. Brown, wait!" I called out to stop him. "Just knowing you care is enough. I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I'll keep the company safe while everyone is away, so it's okay." I tried my best to smile then, but I wonder how it looked to Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown scrutinized my face.
"I see."
Though he seemed to want to say more, Mr. Brown didn't say anything else and went to his workbench. A few days later, on the day of the staff trip, I came to work at the usual time. I opened all the shutters in the factory and office and turned on the office lights. It was the first time I had prepared for the start of the day alone since I joined the company. While preparing, I recalled my first day at work. That day, I had come in early to help prepare for the start of the day. I didn't have a key, but I planned to prepare with the first person who came to work.
You should try doing what your father did when he was a rookie. How about it?
That was my mother's advice. The first person to show up at the company was a big, stern-looking man. It was Mr. Brown. "Good morning." When I greeted him, the man smiled warmly and said,
"You must be the newbie, right? Nice to meet you."
That was the first time I heard Mr. Brown's thick accent. I was slightly taken aback, but seeing Mr. Brown's expression eased my tension instantly. Since then, it became my daily routine to prepare for the day with Mr. Brown. My promise to wake up by myself once I became an adult was nowhere to be found. After joining the company, I was woken up by my mother every day and arrived earlier than the other employees because my time with Mr. Brown was precious. Mr. Brown taught me carefully about his approach to work, his feelings towards product manufacturing, and technical tips. However, I could only have a thorough conversation with Mr. Brown for a few tens of minutes in the morning. Once even a single employee arrived at work, my interaction with Mr. Brown would end.
"We have to treat everyone equally. That's the burden of having a title."
Mr. Brown explained to me once. I came to admire Mr. Brown, who could pay detailed attention to various people. and I felt happy that the person I wanted to aim for was nearby. The reason I remembered my first day of joining the company while I was alone in the company was that I had too much time on my hands. Since everyone is on a company trip, just because the factory is open doesn't mean that I can operate the machinery. The only thing I could do was to play the role of a telephone operator, as Director Smith told me. Nevertheless, I was idle all the time as I only received 2 or 3 calls per hour. It was a while after eating lunch. Rain began to fall, hitting the office windows violently. I remembered the weather forecast I saw this morning, which said that a decent amount of rain would fall in the afternoon. That's unusual. It's actually accurate for once. The weather forecaster on the program I watched makes his own forecasts but often misses, so he is often teased by the host. Moreover, it was clear in the morning. As usual, the host was criticizing the weather forecaster's forecast on the program. I also didn't think that the weather would collapse this drastically. While listening to the sound of the rain, I realized something. Cardboard boxes for storing products from a major contract had been delivered yesterday. The problem was where they were placed. Since the contract was decided at the last minute, the warehouse was full, and they were temporarily placed outside. Even though there was an eave, it was clear that the cardboard would become unusable in such heavy rain. I started to panic and ran to the warehouse, because I remembered that there were tarps. If I could cover it over all, I thought I could prevent it from getting wet to some extent. However, even one tarp was much heavier than I expected. I could only carry 2 at most at one time. I put the tarps I carried on the cardboard boxes. However, it was not going well because I was alone. Moreover, the rain continued. Why is this happening? I continued working while almost crying. That's when it happened.
I'll help you.
Suddenly, someone called out to me from behind. Who are you? I didn't have the luxury of asking such leisurely questions. The priority was to cover the cardboard with tarps. I continued to cover the cardboard with tarps with a stranger who suddenly appeared. The moment the number of people increased to 2, the work efficiency improved dramatically. We were able to cover all the cardboard boxes with tarps.
Did we manage to keep the damage to a minimum by any chance?
He appeared to be around 30 years old. The man asked. Thank you so much. I bowed deeply in gratitude.
No, you don't have to thank me. I'll pass your thanks to my dad.
The man said, chuckling. Something about his smile seemed familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Regardless, the priority was to take shelter from the torrential rain, even if we were soaked to the bone. I invited the man to the office. I was lucky enough to find a towel in the office and gave it to him to dry his hair. Working in the rain had chilled me to the core. He was probably feeling the same way. I turned on the office heating. We both stripped down to our underwear to dry our clothes over a chair. I brewed some instant coffee and handed it to the man.
I'm Michael Johnson. My dad, the CEO, he talks about you all the time.
There was something candid about our conversation. Perhaps stripping down to our underwear had eliminated any awkwardness. Then it clicked. The reason why this man seemed so familiar. Johnson is the CEO's last name. I remembered hearing that the CEO's only son, who had gone to UK to get his MBA, was due to return soon. Apparently, he had come straight to the factory upon returning home. Michael had learned from his father that everyone else would be on a company trip that day. Despite this, he noticed that the office lights were on, but nobody was inside. Then he spotted someone running toward the factory. Curious, he stepped outside and saw me working in the rain. That's when he decided to approach me.
By the way, why are you here today?
Michael asked me. I wasn't sure whether to tell him the truth or not. He probably sensed my hesitation from my expression. Michael said,
My dad, or rather the CEO, was told about your situation by Mr. Brown. He was worried about you and asked me to offer you some advice when I returned.
It was then that I found out that Mr. Brown, like the CEO and Director Smith, was also a high school classmate. This explained why Mr. Brown had been so angry on the day I couldn't make the company trip, and why he had been referring to Director Smith as that guy. I couldn't tell if what Michael had said about the CEO worrying about me was true. Would the CEO really talk about me to Michael, who was overseas? Perhaps Michael was trying to trick me into telling him what had happened. Regardless, Michael's words convinced me to tell him the truth.
I see.
Michael listened to my story, a serious expression on his face.
That's definitely power harassment. If word got out, it could harm our company's reputation. We can't just let this slide,
he said calmly. A few days later, on the day the CEO was discharged from the hospital, I was summoned to his office.
I'm sorry.
The CEO began apologizing as soon as he saw me. I was taken aback, but the CEO continued.
It's all my responsibility.
I thought he must have heard about what I told Michael. After that, Director Smith, who had been harassing me, was demoted to a regular employee. The only reason he wasn't fired was because he showed deep remorse, and because, as a former banker, his financial knowledge was unparalleled in the company and necessary for internal reform. It's easy to let someone go. The true role of a leader is to develop their employees. The CEO's philosophy. Still, I wasn't sure if this change was a good thing for me. Because, after all, Mr. Smith has started to ask me about the procedures and know-how of the work, quite a bit. Apparently, he had been told by Mr. Brown to ask Dexter if you're not sure. Just until recently, I was being referred to as you, but after the reassignment, I'm being called with the formal Mr. Thinking it was a bit too much, I asked him to please call me with just Dexter. Though I hope this awkward relationship with Mr. Smith ends soon, I feel relieved to continue doing the job I love, surrounded by the people I care for, at least for now.